I'm literally sitting on a rock at the edge of a cliff at Dead Horse Point, and the sun just slipped past the horizon. I've been feeling really magnetically drawn to this space, wanting specifically to do a video here. And I had no idea what the video would be about in particular, or even who I was going to be speaking to. But once I finally found a spot that worked and I was able to get situated, I pulled a card from my animal spirit deck, and the card that came out was Third Eye Vision, Reclaim Your Mind. I thought it was interesting that this card in particular came out because I keep hearing really strongly that highly sensitive people in particular, but people in general, are very vulnerable right now when it comes to mental health. And that there are certain people who carry in their bodies the psychic trauma of their ancestors. And when they get triggered and that trauma comes to the surface, it's like when a fault line is triggered and the tectonic plates begin to move and things just shift and they will fall where they may. But the energy needs to come up because it's energy that's been suppressed for a really long time. They say that it's better for a fault line to erupt multiple times with small little eruptions than for the pressure to build and build and build. Because when the pressure builds and builds and builds and there's not earthquakes, there's more potential for the earthquake to be massively destructive. So the thing I keep hearing is that there's a lot of multisensory, highly sensitive, empathic people on the planet right now that are very sensitive psychically to the war that's going on, the psychic warfare or the spiritual warfare, whatever you want to call it. But we have to remember that war is literally connected to the lack matrix. It's part of the whole game of sacrifice. And what I believe a lot of empaths and highly sensitive people are doing here is helping to transmute and alchemicalize the psychic trauma from years and years of war. So the anomaly for us is to not go to war. It's almost as if you were to imagine that you came from the future and you came to a point in time in which humans were very, very vulnerable, and that there are very specific people on the planet that are key grid holders that if they erupt, it sets off a whole chain of events. And somehow in the future, we were able to see that there are very specific key people on the grid that if they're triggered, fault lines all over are triggered. And we figured out that emotions are connected to the weather, and that natural disasters are very indicative of shifting, things changing, power changing hands, all of it. So we decided to come back in time, quote unquote, right to the spot right before the trigger was about to go off, or as the trigger was going off, you could say, in small little doses. And we were able to help those people who were in those critical places on those key fault lines to alchemicalize the energy, to know that they can actually not choose the side of the devil or the angel, but instead choose humanity and not sacrifice humanity in the war between right and wrong. That's what I believe on some level we're doing as we remember who we are, as we wake up and remember that we are multisensory, that we're creators, and that what we focus on, what we give our emotional attention to, and what we intend, we create. It's also a pivotal time because humans will continue to play the war game to the end of time until they wake up and remember who they are. And you can't remember who you are when you're in a state of duality, when you see others as completely separate from you and different from you. From that state, it's difficult to remember that we're all connected, that there's ultimately one spirit that animates all of us. And this Reclaim Your Mind, to me, is about taking authority over our humanities, knowing that we have personal free agency. We actually do have a thing called sovereign free will, and we get to choose with our sovereign free will what we will do with our creative energy. We have a choice. And when we're in a trigger, we don't realize we have a choice. That's why things like crimes of passion happen. when people lose, to not have a grip on your mind is to get triggered to such an extent into lack that you completely forget who you are. You completely forget the nature of what you are and what we are as creators, as just energy, as pure life energy. And so when we're triggered into that space, we go into all of our fears. And because we're powerful creators, we can find evidence of everything, every fear we have. There is a scenario, a potential reality where that fear lives out. And so when we're in a powerful state of trigger, we can quite literally imagine the worst case scenario and create it because we that palpably feel it in our central nervous system. And our creative connection to life itself is directly connected to how we feel in our central nervous system. And so I believe that there's this time period, there's an opportunity right now to take a deep breath and to pause. And before we take action at all, remember that we get to choose what reality we live in. And we vote for it by how we show up in our resonance, with what truth we show up in. Because if we take action from the belief that there's not enough, we're not enough, then we create more of that experience. We choose to participate in the lack game in an even deeper level. So we put the body and the planet and others through a deeper level of that reality of there's not enough, we're not enough, we have to go to war to prove we have to go to war over resources, over love, over ideologies. And there's only one reality. We get stuck, and then our fears take over, and we create a world based on our fears. But when we can take authority over our minds, when we can regain our minds and anoint our minds with the abundance matrix, with heaven on earth, with the belief that there's enough, I'm enough, you're enough, and I choose with my sovereign free will to create from that seed of belief rather than from the seed of lack that there's not enough. And so if there is enough, then my options change, and what's available to me changes, and what's a potential reality to line up to changes. If there's not enough, the options are much, much more limited. And that's when we choose lack. That's when we choose sacrifice. And that's when we go to war. So imagine for a minute, if you're feeling drawn to this, if you were drawn to this video, tune into your extrasensory abilities, and particularly to the areas that you feel are most vulnerable on the planet right now, or most vulnerable in yourself. And in this case, I'm feeling it's most likely your mind, your mental space, or the mental space of humanity. So where can you shift in your mind, in your commitment and your focus to there's enough? Because when we commit to that in our mind, we strengthen the mental grid of humanity. We strengthen the mind of humanity because our physical bodies are the touch point for humanity. So you could say this is how we traveled back in time, so to speak, through these bodies that are highly, highly sensitive to energy, highly sensitive to emotion, highly sensitive to thoughts, because we can feel where the vulnerabilities are and we can soothe them by soothing us. So our central nervous system goes into them. We know, okay, these are areas that need to be soothed. These are areas where there's deep psychic trauma. These are areas where there's like ancestral imprints of trauma. So this experience of trauma is getting played out over and over and over again because it's attempting to be transmuted. So when we can be, I was talking to a client of mine the other day, and she talked about feeling like there's a tornado going around. But as an empath, if she said, if I see myself as solid and unresisting of the tornado, and I let it come through me and move my energy field, and then it leaves me, the storm is changed. I'm not changed. I still remain me. But by allowing the storm to flow through me, I witnessed it. And I held space for it in my body, and I transmuted it into something else. And there's a level of witness that people who are highly sensitive can give to humanity that people who aren't that tuned in or that highly sensitive in their central nervous system they're just numbed out to. They can't even feel it. So if you are highly sensitive and you're feeling vulnerable at all in your mental space, or you are feeling vulnerable to humanity's mental stability, know that the work you do in your own mind, you do for all of humanity. So the number one thing anyone who's highly sensitive can do for themselves is choose heaven on earth. Choose to calm your central nervous system whilst witnessing the storms around you. Witness, witness, witness with the intention of transmuting the energy. Not that you're doing it yourself, but there's something about witness that does transmute. So I hope this reading was helpful for you. It's getting super cold here, and so I'm ready to end this, but this feels really powerful for me. I feel like this video in particular is for grid workers, and it's just a reminder that when you're in the win-win-win, you work for heaven on earth. You work for the healing and restoration of the planet and of humanity. And so your calling is different, and what you respond to is different. And if you listen to the calling of that, the calling of the restoration, and you allow it to lead you where you're meant to focus, where you're meant to speak, where you're meant to engage, where you're meant to invest, where you're meant to show up, where you're meant to click, where you're meant to respond or comment. This especially applies to how we are using our energy online. We forget how much power we have. We forget we have sovereign free will. And claiming your sovereign free will, you don't have to fight for it. You don't have to go to war for it. It's just yours. It's innately yours. You just have to claim it. And then choose, regain power over your mind and choose, anoint it for a purpose. Say what your mind will be used for and what it won't be used for. Be clear to yourself what you will use your creative abilities for, and then give all of your energy to that. And if you clicked on this video, it seems like you work for heaven on earth. And so the step in is allowing yourself to experience heaven on earth in your whole central nervous system, in your resonance field, which will help clear the grid. It will also trigger people into allowing their trauma to come up about where they aren't in alignment with heaven on earth. And so you very much are a transmuter, and that's why it's important to stay still in the eye of the storm. There's so much more to come. I love you guys, and I hope you're doing well. And remember, you're not alone. I really believe the mind of humanity is safer in the hands of people like you. So thank you.